So a couple of years ago I made a video about the split between pay-to-play players and free-to-play players and the animosity that they feel towards each other, mainly because they're the other side of the same coin and they're barely different, but they seem to hate each other for no real reason. As I grew into a slightly larger Evan, I kind of noticed a way larger split that I never really noticed before, up until matchmaking, which, to be honest, was weird because I've been on both sides, which is the difference between a casual player and a competitive player. Now, in essence, a casual player only plays pubs. They only play like an hour or two a week. They only really play TF2 for hats and to dick about and to high five and hit people with fishes and to generally do stupid shit. And generally, updates seem to be kind of tailored around them. A lot of updates tend to have a lot of stuff that kind of accommodates for casual players. But then on the flip side, there is a lot less of these people, but there is still a lot of them. I'd say a good 20,000, if not a bit less, a bit more, give or take. There is competitive players. Now, competitive players are players who do play the occasional pub, some of them, but most of them play primarily lobbies. They play TF2 pickups, they play mixes, they play competitive games with an actual team, and they play tournaments and stuff like that, and generally they just play 6v6 or Highlander mostly. I mean, there are some 4s mains, but I haven't met that many of them. A large portion of the community is just 6s and Highlander. I play 6s mostly. I'm mostly a 6s main. I haven't played in a while, but I used to be a scout main a long time ago. But in saying that, there's a big divide in terms of skill, attitude, and really general outlook towards the game between two sides. Firstly, casual players are not as good at the game, but there is a lot more of them. I mean, there's a good 100,000 players who are casuals, if not on and off. I don't play a lot, but play out now and again. There is a fair few amount of casual players who play just for a little bit, and they're the kind of player whose observation is usually malinformed about the game. They don't know as much about the game, but that's mostly because they don't play with players at a really high level. Like, if you enter competitive, usually there's people who are much better than you at that level, and you get exponentially better. That's the reason why competitive players are better than pub players, because if you constantly play with players who are better than you at a consistent rate, you reach their level eventually, and that becomes a much higher level than where you were. And then, so if you keep playing with players who are better than you all the time, you will eventually get really, really, really good. It's just the way it is. That's where the skill difference between pub players and competitive players come from. But in saying that, just because pub players aren't as good as competitive players doesn't mean I think that competitive players should be dicks to pub players because they're not as good. And there are a few competitive players that I actually know as well, some of them, that are serious dicks to non-competitive players. They seriously hate casuals. They seriously hate the way they outlook on the game. They seriously hate the fact that they aren't as good as they are, and they even hate some casual players who try to start playing competitive and enter a TF2 lobby or something and really get shat on. Especially to play an important class like Medic and Demo. They tend to really, really hate that. In my opinion, TF2 is one of the most closed off team-based games there is. Like, they actually hate new players coming into the competitive scene. They really, really hate it. In fairness, a lot of team-based games that exist at the moment are very closed off in terms of their competitive scene, but holy shit, TF2 is like, we don't want anybody new sometimes. They seem to hate the idea of new players coming in. Some players love it, which is why they've made TF2 Center, but there's other players who will constantly berate new players and try to get them to stop playing competitive, which sometimes it works, and it heavily reduces the amount of competitive players that are coming in and makes it so more leaving than coming in at the moment. On the flip side, casual players despise competitive players. Firstly, because for one reason, they don't like the fact that they see this casual game as a competitive game. I've actually seen that before, that a lot of casual players don't like competitive players, mainly because they see a game that they see as casual in a competitive light, because they think its mechanics of it's too casual, which firstly I disagree with. The mechanics of the game are very solid and it's very possible to make a competitive scene out of it. But as well as that, there's also the side that just hate the competitive players because they're dicks to them, and that's the side that I understand a bit more than the side that just hates them because they like competitive. There's two sides to this, and in my opinion, the people that are wrong in this situation, competitive players who hate casual players because they want to see a competitive game in a casual light in their eyes, and casual players who hate competitive players because they want to see a casual game in a competitive light, again, in their eyes. Like, it's very much a matter of perspective. In my opinion, TF2 is a game that you interpret the way you want to interpret it. It was a very much an open-ended, very, very revolutionary game, in my opinion, in terms of class-based shooters. And it really did open up the fact that it can be both a competitive and casual game. Like, it has random shit like fucking throwing fishes and knives and just doing stupid shit like doing a conga. but it also has really, really competent mechanics that make it a really good team-based shooter. It actually has a lot of good mechanics going for it, as well as being a really entertaining thing to watch in a competitive scene because of how hype it can be with air shots and just massive team fights and Ubers going off. It is a really cool competitive game to watch. So in my opinion, this game really can be both. It can be both competitive and it can be casual, and you don't really need to interpret it as a certain way. And there has been attempts to kind of bridge the gap between both sides. Like, matchmaking in my opinion was a shit attempt because it just kind of made a clusterfuck of casual players playing against other casual players, with the occasional competitive player shitting on all of their day and making none of them want to play any sense of competitive anymore. In my opinion, the best way that I've seen so far of bridging the gap was Tip of the Hats, because it kind of equally represented both casual and competitive players. It's showing that casual players are just players who don't want to play a competitive scene at all, but they're happy to watch Tip of the Hat because they're equally represented with competitive players, despite the fact that it's run by competitive players. See, props to those guys. They definitely know what they're doing. Anyway, I'd like to hear what you think about competitive or casual players in the comments, if you're one side or the other side, and do you hate them or are you just neutral towards them? Because I have friends who play casually and just are completely neutral towards competitive TF2. And I look forward to seeing the amount of dislikes in this video, because people who don't agree with your opinion tend to love disliking videos, and I feel like this is going to be berated with dislikes. Anyway, I'll see you again next time, and have a nice day.